This is Live from the Table, the official podcast of the world-famous Comedy Cellar. And we are available wherever you get your podcasts. We are available on demand on Sirius XM, available on YouTube, where you get to see as well as hear all the fun. This is Dan Natterman, Comedy Cellar comedian. Here with Noam Dwarman, Comedy Cellar owner, back from Costa Rica on a family vacay. And the fun never stops at the Dwarman household. I wish I was born into his one of his kids. That would be that sounds like a fun time. Periel is with us.
Hello.
Periel is our producer. She's an on-air personality. She's a comedian. She's a writer. She does it all. And we don't have a guest for this show because we are going to discuss in some detail the debate on the Joe Rogan show between Mr. Dave Smith and Douglas Murray, which has set the social media world abuzz, and even beyond the social media world. So it's been a hot topic of conversation, and we're going to discuss it here. So,
can we discuss a little podcast business?
Okay, go ahead.
Dan said he wanted to discuss the Rogan podcast.
That's right.
And I said, sure. But you guys send me your time codes of particular points in the podcast you want to discuss. And, so I can have them prepared and everything.
I never got that email.
Did you?
I got the email.
How did you get it without Periel getting it? That's
I don't
a neat
know.
trick. All right.
But
I never got that email 100%.
You got it. Or it doesn't matter. It doesn't
Well,
No, it does
Not
matter.
that you need to get the email
I
to know to be prepared for a discussion.
well,
like
I know precisely the points.
Okay, you do?
that I wish to discuss.
Okay, but let's start out by saying I've been agitating on this show now for a year and a half for this very day that we could get this conversation into the mainstream about how the the right has been slowly but surely overtaken with conspiracy theories. But before we get into it, I just want to make the point, because anytime I tweet about this now, I'm buried in anti-Semitic tweets and answers, which is kind of jarring. You don't know how to really put that in perspective. I know that if like 30 people show up to a white supremacy rally in Charlottesville or something, people consider, or even 300 or, some small number, people consider that highly significant. So what does it mean when, millions of Twitterati, what do you call them? What do you call people on Twitter? Twitter users?
Not
Twitterati.
I would call them users, or accounts. I would call them Twitter accounts. Because, of course, you could have one person with many accounts.
Yeah, are following anti-Semites, and tens of thousands are engaging in vile anti-Semitic tweets. But anyway, we really don't know how to gauge all that. But I just want to say that this was an issue of mine before October 7th, before Israel was front and center, when Tucker Carlson began to say crazy things about Ukraine and about, how the vaccine was crippling people and all sorts of 9/11 conspiracy theories. This was all creeping more and more into the kind of mainstream of the right. And it was getting a warm reception on the Rogan show, which I felt was dangerous because Rogan was giving it all a kind of air of respectability because he's so highly regarded and because he has so many very credible guests on at the same time, and then these people socialize with each other. And anyway, so I'm very happy to be having this discussion. I'm very happy the discussion has gone into the mainstream, and it does, after all, now at this point have a lot to do with Israel as well, but it has to do with the entire standard of proof that an enormous percentage of the country is now requiring of itself before it believes things. That's really what it is. Like I made the point on a podcast last week. It used to be you had the serious part of the store where you had the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and Time Magazine, and then you had the supermarket checkout aisle that had the Weekly World News that had headlines like aliens living under the sea, disciples of Satan, and testicle tanning, and Bin Laden really a Mossad operative, and you name the crazy conspiracy that Tucker Carlson is into. Pentagon studying alien cadavers for weapon systems, right? But now it's all mixed together. The same Tucker Carlson that's saying the very things that you would be certain would be like fringe headlines in you can't even really call it a legitimate newspaper. He's also interviewing heads of state, important scientists, Trump's minis negotiator. So it all gets mixed together. So, you would just assume that if the guy's interviewing the president and his negotiator and, important philosophers and authors, that when he says something like 9/11 was an inside job, or that the Pentagon is studying alien cadavers, or that he was mauled by demons, I mean, it boggles the mind. So this is where we're at. That's kind of a long introduction. I'm trying to inoculate myself against the charge that this is all about Israel and all about the Jews. So go ahead, Dan. What are your feelings about it?
Well, the first point is I thought you would have probably done a better job than Douglas Murray did.
No.
For Douglas Murray, he came off as arrogant, which, he did.
Okay, to you. Yeah.
Well, I think to a lot of people. I think he made too much of Dave Smith never having been to the region.
No, there was not starvation in Gaza after 2005. No, there was no deficit of goods coming in. I've been plenty of times.
There was no deficit?
No, there are plenty.
No goods were kept out.
There are plenty. How many? Have you been to the crossing points?
No.
When were you last there at all?
I've never been.
You've never been?
Well, am I not allowed to talk about it now? I've never been to. Have you ever been to Nazi Germany? Are you allowed to have feelings about them?
You can't time travel, but you can.
Right.
But you can travel.
Okay, but so what? So what's the point?
No,
okay.
I find that
lots of people have been there and agree with me, and lots of people have been there and agree with you.
Yeah, but
so
if
I don't
you're
know
going to spend a year and a half talking about a place, you should at least do the courtesy of visiting it.
All right. I just think this is a non-argument.
You don't
but
think?
Okay. No, I think it's a non-argument.
But if you're an
Will you have to go and touch the ground?
No, I think you have to see. I think it's a good idea to see stuff, particularly if you spend a career talking about something. Yes.
And I think he probably was not shocked when Dave said he had never been there. I think Douglas Murray would have just better off he should have just said, well, I would recommend that you go, since it's a topic that is so near and dear to your heart. And now let's discuss the heart of the matter, rather than kind of very dramatically saying, well, you should at least have the courtesy to have gone. And I thought that Dave scored a point when Dave said, well, basically just we can discuss things without having gone there. It may be preferable to go there, and maybe a serious scholar would have gone there, but I don't think it was necessary to belabor that point. I think Murray could have just said, well, I recommend that you go, and my personal policy is always to go to places, if I can, wherever practical.
All right, I thought a lot about this point. And by the way, I want to just preface it by saying, after watching it 3 times, I've come to the conclusion that Murray wiped the floor with Dave and Rogan in the debate, but it was very easy to miss it. Do you know why? It was easy to miss it because on all the most important points, different interpretations of Darryl Cooper notwithstanding, Rogan and Smith conceded. They actually conceded every main point about how dangerous it is that this stuff is spreading on the right.
And I think this is very, very interesting and also very dangerous, because we live in an era now that the right has got some mojo back in America. We saw years of crazy left overreach where they tried to make us all say the craziest things. And completely predictably, there are now figures on the right playing with really dark and ugly stuff on their side.
I agree
and
with
they
that.
are mainstreaming
I don't
this,
think
and I
Daryl's
think it's
doing that.
partly being mainstreamed by the 2 people I just described. And both of you have kept speaking to these people.
How this is dark and ugly stuff, how there is a subculture that's that's growing.
There are movements now on the right in America, subcultures, including people who follow both of you, who are very interested in playing with this absolute beyond the pale thing. Why somebody like Jake Shields wants to play around with Holocaust denial? Why?
I can't answer for Jake Shields. I don't know.
Why do you think?
I have no idea. I think
I'm telling
a
you,
lot of people get captured by audience capture.
Captured by their audience.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. You get a lot of positive reinforcement from a bunch of twisted people.
They kind of conceded even the point about Darryl Cooper by trying to pretend that he was just kidding. He was just hyperbole. He really wasn't saying that Churchill was the villain of World War II. But as I'll show you.
They also conceded, Dave Smith also conceded, that Hamas is dangerous and that eliminating them is a worthy goal.
Yeah. So on the, and as we'll show, although they conceded these points, their actual behavior does not indicate that they live by these points. And that is really the heart of the matter. But now Dave is very agile, I have to say, and that's a compliment, and it's not a backhanded compliment. So he was, by conceding these points and choosing not to engage on the playing field where he was at a disadvantage, he kind of left Douglas without anywhere to go because he can't just keep pounding him over the head with it. And then, unfortunately, Douglas is not a fanatical, aficionado of what's going on in this crazy world. So he didn't have the knowledge to start really interrogating Dave. Well, if you say that, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? Why'd you do that?
Well, that's why I felt you would have been actually probably better.
Yeah, but let's get to the point about having actually being in a place. So, yes, of course, it's true that we all comment and have opinions on places we haven't been. And at first, although Douglas had a very clever retort, well, yes, you can't time travel. Dave Smith said, well, does that mean you can't have an opinion about Nazi Germany because you weren't there? And he says, well, you can't time travel, but you can travel. But let's just imagine that there was some Chinese guy in China, and he was known in China all over for commenting on the American black experience. It could be other things, healthcare in America, but let's say the American black experience. And he really didn't know, never been to America, didn't know black people, or if he did meet some black people along the way, it was black people who were kind of in his circle of politics, right? He informed himself by reading NPR and the New York Times, and he became an expert on black people. First of all, we'd all say, well, how well could this Chinese guy really understand black America? You're a Chinese guy. You don't speak the language. You don't know the people. You're gonna consider yourself, without humility, an expert on this subject, and then say to the Chinese guy, well, listen, have you visited America? No. I'm tempted to do a Chinese accent, but I won't. No. You want to do it? No,
I'm not going to do it. I'll happily do a British accent. That's okay.
No. So I have no interest in no, I'm good. I'm going to make it, I'm going to continue basically my career, or a big portion of my career, commenting on the black American experience and championing their cause. But I don't really think I need to go and meet more black people or start learn the language, or to be able to read, Glenn Lowry or Coleman Hughes, or go speak to them. I don't need that. We would say, okay, are you a serious person here? Now, that's not to say that he might come to a conclusion we agree with or disagree with. But it is, I think, we could be fairly certain that the conclusion, even if it turned out to be one we agreed with, was shallowly derived. Now imagine this guy starts having a conversation with some black guy or somebody who's spent their lives, seeing this, and he says, "What are you talking about? Have you ever what coming out of your mouth? The stuff you're saying makes no sense to me. This is like a a cartoonish version of what the truth is. And this is what Douglas Murray was saying, because he's been to Gaza. I presume he'd been there before the war as well. He'd seen the shopping malls. He'd seen the middle-class life, the wealthy life, and I'm sure the very horrible life of poverty. He'd seen the stores. He's seen the shopping. He's seen the tunnels. He's seen to what extent the quality of life goes up and down in relationship to a recent attack, a rocket launch. Like, he's seen it all, and it's all in him. And then he hears Dave talking about these kind of glib slogans. It's a concentration camp. It's an open-air prison. Now, these are bumper stickers. And it was a natural reaction for Dave to say, for Douglas to say, based on his actual deep knowledge of the experience, what's the matter with you? You're kind of a fraud here. Have you ever been there? No. Why not? Like, why would, what, don't you have the humility to say to yourself, maybe I should go see this for myself? Or put it another way, if I said, Dave, do you actually believe that if you went to visit Israel and Gaza, that your experience would not deepen your understanding of the issue in any way? You really don't think, like, you're, just as a matter of, like, I could compare it to music. Like, my father used to yell at me when we were playing music together. It has to be right. I said, well, there's no audience. It doesn't matter. If you're going to do it, you do it right. That's just as a thing. Like, okay, it doesn't matter if you can get away with it. It doesn't matter what the excuse is. Just as a matter of personal integrity, if you're going to sign on the dotted line about the subject of Israel and Gaza, and you're going to be influential
in front of millions of people,
don't you have the personal humility to say to yourself, you know what, maybe I should go check this out for myself?
And intellectual curiosity.
I'm absolutely able to do it. I'm absolutely able to do it. And I find myself, I didn't count on it. This wasn't the career I set for myself. But you know what? I'm a world figure here on this now. The most important shows invite me on. You know what? I've never even fucking been there. And I'm telling people it's this and it's that. Maybe I ought to get your ass to Mars. Maybe I got to get my ass to Israel. Speak to some people. Now, you know, and by the way, I'm talking a long time, but one of the reasons I felt confident in certain opinions is because, first of all, and Peril knows this too, I know Israelis like the back of my hand, right? I know exactly how they think, how they don't think, except for the far-right crazies, who I can't say I understand them. And I also know a lot of Arabic people. I know Palestinian people. And I've commented on this show that actually they're much more reasonable about, in my experience, about this stuff than the Dave Smiths are. And I've said on this show because they actually understand it in a way that Dave Smith doesn't. When we took a trip to Israel, you know, with some journalists and stuff, many of them went to early to get a tour of the West Bank with Bet Selim, which is kind of like an activist pro-Palestinian group in Israel. And I wasn't able to go, but I wanted to go. Why did I want to go? Why did I want to go? Was it stupid of me to want to go? I wanted to go because I said, well, this is something I should see. Like and if you notice, I don't actually give strong opinions about what goes on the West Bank because I know I'm not going to get it by reading the particular newspaper that represents the point of view of the people who feel a particular way about the West Bank, reading Haaretz, whatever it is. And I can't read the Hebrew language papers, and I don't know people who live there. So I kind of tread very lightly on that subject, but Dave Smith doesn't. So this is why I would defend Douglas Murray on that. Okay, what's your next subject? Can we talk about the what do you want to talk about? The expertise subject?
Okay, or also his accusation, which he started the debate, accusing Rogan of being one-sided, even though Rogan has had on some pro-Israel voices, namely Coleman Hughes. He's had on Murray before, so is he being with regard to Israel one-sided, as Murray had.
I think Rogan admitted to being weighting his show towards the side of people who feel that what Israel is doing is barbaric. I think that was his exact term.
Do you think you've tilted one way?
Me personally?
No, just with the guests you've had.
The guests? Yeah, probably more tilted towards the idea that perhaps the way they've done it is barbaric.
Mm-hmm. But why do you think that is? Just out of interest. I'm just interested in your selection of guests because you're like the world's #1 podcast. So
yeah, it's not. I don't think about it that way. I just think I'd like to talk to this person.
Coleman went on, but Coleman didn't go on, was not invited on to speak about Israel. As a matter of fact, Coleman had to shoehorn his comment on Israel in, and Coleman's never been invited back on the show, by the way. I don't know that any notable pro-Israel. I don't watch the show that often. I know that Gad Saad has spoken in behalf of Israel. I saw some clip going around today of somebody who spoke up for Israel. Obviously, it's not zero people who've gone in Israel. I don't think Israel is Israel is not the main issue to me. I'm much more concerned about the normalizing of conspiratorial anti-Semites than I am the fact that Rogan has on an expert who wants to criticize Israel. As a matter of fact, it doesn't bother me at all that Rogan has on an expert or a responsible person who wants to make the case against Israel. I've never complained that Rogan had on Dave Smith.
But what responsible people has he had on?
That criticize Israel?
Criticize.
I don't know. I don't follow it. I'm just saying that the whole topic of Israel is not...
That was a large part of the debate, and that's what kind of went viral. Was number one, two things really went viral. Number one, this notion you had to have been somewhere, and this notion of expertise, and this notion of the elite versus the blue collar regular Joe that Dave Smith represents.
So what Murray spoke about at the beginning was about Darryl Cooper. Now, Darryl Cooper and about Churchill. There was a whole long, and it was a recurring conversation that kept coming back around again about what it was about Darryl Cooper and World War II revisionism and Churchill, and was Darryl Cooper an expert? And I actually have some clips here of it. So now a lot of these clips are edited together into collages. I really would like to make them longer, but there's just no way to do it and get through them. So I encourage everybody to go to the actual podcast and listen to the whole thing. Be sure I'm not taking anything out of context. So this is just some general things that were said in the argument about whether Darryl Cooper, Martyr Maid, as he's known online, was qualified to be talking about World War II. Now, I'll call your attention to what you're going to see here already, is that, in my opinion, they speak out of both sides of their mouths. Every time that they say he's an expert, every time Douglas Murray says that Cooper is an expert, Rogan and Smith will go, no, he's not an expert. He's just a history nerd. Ask him. He'll tell you he's not an expert. But then they'll flip when Murray wants to criticize his knowledge about it. They'll say, no, he's quite knowledgeable about this stuff. He does long history podcasts, 30 hours. He's doing a whole World War II series. So, of course, we all just have to ask ourselves, well, what does it mean to be an expert? If you're not an expert, why would you presume that you should be doing 20, 30 hours of history podcasts? And if you're not an expert, why are Rogan and Smith so enamored with listening to his opinions on things? Now, I happen to think he is an expert. I'm going to talk about expertise in a second. But let's just watch this video here.
It's the bottom.
But do you have any... there's been a tilt in the conversation, in both conversations, in the last couple of years. And it's largely to do with people who have appointed themselves experts.
You mean like Ian? I don't think he appoints himself an expert in anything.
Who's that other dude who thinks he's an expert on Churchill?
Darryl Cooper does not think he's an expert.
In fact, I think it's everybody else is always calling him an expert, and he's like, I'm just a history nerd.
Have you ever...
Darryl is incredibly knowledgeable.
It's not.
It's just
he's not.
Yeah,
he's
he
not.
is.
He's
Why do you say that?
wildly.
Daryl Cooper is currently, I believe, almost finished, or he's working on a big World War II series. He does long-form podcasts.
My point is, this is not a serious historian.
No,
He's
no,
not
no, no.
a historian.
He never claims to be. He's been doing these long-form podcasts on these subjects for over a decade.
All right. So do you see the contradiction there?
Yeah, I do see it. Yeah.
So what do you see? He never claimed to be an expert. He's very, very knowledgeable. He's been doing these long-form things on history.
Right, that's a
He would never
contradiction.
say he's an expert. So what game are they playing there? Now, this is why I'm saying Douglas won the debate. Because what they don't say is, no, he's an expert and he's right. They don't say that. That would be the day. They are collapsing. And then they go on. Now, there's a question about Churchill. And every time Murray wants to take them to task for the fact that Daryl hates Churchill and tries to make Churchill into the villain, play Daryl Cooper just kidding on Churchill?
I've decided that Churchill is the bad guy in World War II.
Somebody said that. What he said was he jokes with his friend Jocko, who's an Anglo-Saxon. He jokes with him,
Just joking.
I think that Churchill was the secret villain of World War II. He literally says
Yes, he
he's
said
joking.
in the comment, he goes, listen, I'm being hyperbolic. And then he once again disclaimed, he goes, and I'm not claiming Churchill committed the most atrocities or was the worst part. But in many ways, I do view him as the chief villain, as my hyperbolic, provocative statement there.
You're just taking this one statement and then this where he's trying to joke around with his buddy, this Churchill statement. And this is the basis
he
of
and
this.
these other guys are all doing the anti-Churchill
Now, pause
stuff.
here for a second. I pause here because after saying he's just joking, it's almost as if they can't help themselves. Then right at the end here, then Rogan adds on, but he was involved in this conspiracy. Churchill was. Play it? Okay.
Not doing an anti-Churchill
Okay,
stuff.
he and the other
but
people in the orbit I'm
Churchill was
describing.
the author of this whole Operation Unthinkable, right? Where they wanted to use the Nazis to invade Russia.
Now
Wasn't
watch-
that Churchill?
Watch Douglas Murray's face.
Is that not true?
So Rogan, after saying, you're just kidding, who would say such things about Churchill? That's the implication. And if you keep saying, when somebody says something and you don't want to defend it, it's now say, he was just kidding, I was just kidding, I didn't mean it. But then Rogan at the tail end puts in, but he was involved in Operation Unthinkable, which was actually a drawing board idea of having, at the end of the war, as I understand it, having the defeated Nazis help in the fight against the Soviet Union. And by the way, just a little aside, drawing board ideas, something that was in some CIA report or some Mossad report these things that actually never come to fruition, but were considered or bandied about by nutty people. This is one of the main nutrients of conspiracy theories. You'll see this. They'll always talk about these plans that actually never happened. And
Well-
not that they're irrelevant, but so let me just continue. So right after the Tucker interview, when Martin May got in hot water, and he did say, being kind of hyperbolic, that Churchill is the chief villain. Chief villain, I believe, was his exact phrase. He tweets out a couple days later, 7.7 million views. Time for a Churchill thread. Let's do this. And then he writes why I think Churchill was a chief villain of World War II. He switches it from the chief villain to a chief villain. This is because he was just kidding, right? Now it's not a joke anymore. And then he writes, I know that sounds like hyperbole. Churchill didn't order the most deaths, oversee the most atrocities, or commit the worst crimes. But most of those crimes could not have been committed if the war had not happened. And Churchill was the leader most intent on making it happen.
Well, maybe he was being hyperbolic when he said, I know that sounds like hyperbole.
So that's Martin made, response to the thing. Now, Rogan and Smith are 100% aware of the stuff that Daryl said right after that Tucker interview. Rogan told Daryl that he followed very closely the reaction to the interview. Now, why are they, it has to be, it's extremely sloppy if it's not disingenuous. Why are they hiding behind the fact that he was just kidding?
But again, Douglas didn't bring this stuff.
Yeah, all right. Okay, Dan.
I'm just well,
Okay,
we're debriefing the debate. I think it's important to say where Douglas fell short, where Murray fell short.
All right. This is how Darryl explained Churchill to Rogan on his show. Go ahead.
And so that's why we're here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, the Tucker interview was, I could have been clearer in what I was saying. I'm not going to absolve
Let's
myself.
explain what you said, because you were talking about what you say to Jocko, right?
Yeah, that's how it originally came up. Because Jocko's wife's English, right? So Churchill's like a sacred figure in their pantheon. And so I said that, maybe I'm being a little provocative here. I like to provoke Jocko with my Churchill takes or whatever. But that's only part of it. I mean, I'm very critical of Churchill's role, in my opinion, in turning the German invasion of Poland into the Second World War, basically.
So that's how Rogan had it explained to him. That doesn't sound like Darryl was even saying that he was kidding, right? And then if you look at the next one is Darryl Cooper on Churchill to Tucker. This is where you get to the real heart of the matter, because what is being lost here is that it's not simply that Darryl said that Churchill was the chief villain of World War II. It's that he said that Churchill was installed by Zionist financiers to pursue Jewish interests. That is the more important thing that Darryl said, and he was not joking. And this comes, and again, Dave Smith knows this comes directly from David Irving. David Irving is the most famous Holocaust denier there is. Can you play that one?
The reason I resent Churchill so much for it is that he kept this war going when he had no way to go back and fight this war. All he had were bombers. He was literally, by 1940, sending bomber fleets to go firebomb the Black Forest, just to burn down sections of the Black Forest. Just rank terrorism. It's the greatest, scale of terrorist attacks we've ever seen in world history.
Why would he do that? What was the motive?
What was the motive? Smiles.
Well, Churchill's got a long and complicated history. I mean, he's somebody who
that was the wryest smile I think I've ever seen.
Yeah. Well, look, I think on one level, there was a sense that Churchill was sort of humiliated by his performance in the First World War.
Yeah.
But then you get into, why was Winston Churchill such a dedicated booster of Zionism from early on in his life, right? And there's ideological reasons. But then as time goes on, you read stories about Churchill going bankrupt and needing money, getting bailed out by people who shared his interests, in terms of Zionism, but also his hostility, I think his hostility to, put it this way, I think his hostility to Germany was real. I don't think that he necessarily had to be bribed to have that feeling. But, I think he was, to an extent, put in place by people, the financiers, by a media complex that wanted to make sure that he was the guy who was representing Britain in that conflict for a reason.
All right, so where's the joke? Sound like he's just kidding to you? So let's get to the subject of expertise.
But can we just very briefly mention that he did disclaim that on a subsequent tweet?
Disclaimed what?
He said that, well, actually, I don't know if Churchill was installed by Zionists. I think he was responding to you, perhaps.
I don't know that he disclaimed that, but I'll look for it. He might have. He didn't disclaim it. I did a podcast with him. He didn't disclaim it. He's on the podcast that I did with him. He said he got the argument from David Irving.
Okay, but I think there was a later tweet where he said, well, I don't know that he was installed by Zionists.
Can you find it?
Yeah, well, I'll have to look for it, but you'll have to excuse me while I use my phone.
So there was a lot of arguments about who's an expert, who's not an expert, who has a right to be talking about this and who doesn't, things like this. Now, I don't know how you feel about it. Obviously, in hard sciences, it's very clear what expertise is And there's not much debate about it. So none of us want to go into a building that was not designed by a trained architect, or be diagnosed by someone who's not trained as a doctor.
Well, actually, I might question the latter example. There are plenty of people that think doctors don't know shit, as we saw.
You want to go over a bridge that was designed by someone who's, taught himself how to design suspension bridges. We have many professions that require certifications before you can do them. And while there might be some ridiculous examples like hairdresser, quite often we believe, yes, you should have to go to 5 years of school and be tested before you can do this or that. But what we learned more recently is that even the things we thought were not susceptible to that kind of erosion are susceptible to political pressures. So we did see even medical doctors, and research scientists bending to political correctness and really just, bastardizing the notion that they were experts on anything. And this did real damage to the notion of trust in experts. And perhaps we saw some of this on COVID too. Not perhaps, we saw some of it, but I also think some of that's exaggerated. But when virologists were saying that to suspect lab leak was racist, they really made a mockery of their own expertise. But that's all scientific. Then you have social sciences. Now, of course, I think people like psychologists, I actually think they know less, they have negative knowledge quite often, because I think in certain, I'm probably wrong, but in certain subjects, I find the expertise almost to be off-putting. But in things like history and politics, first of all, being an expert doesn't mean, as opposed to physics, that you will come to the same conclusion as the next guy. As a matter of fact, you take 5 different Israeli historians, and you'll have 5 different opinions about the Arab-Israeli conflict. Although if you take 5 different Arabic historians, you probably will have unanimity, which says something about which culture do you think is a more healthy culture, the one that has unanimity or the one that has dissent? So, they are experts in that they know all the facts, but certainly laymen can learn enough of the bullet points and teach themselves enough without certification to weigh in on political subjects in a way that we regard as credible. I mean, the whole notion of democracy is based on a certain wisdom of people to be able to decide issues. So there's a tension there. But so I'm going to say that Darryl is an expert. But there's another issue which is very important, which is fair-mindedness, as I said before, humility, integrity, and fastidiousness with accuracy. And on these matters, I think Dave gets a very low grade. I think he's very sloppy. I'll put it as sloppy. And I think that the Rogan show, in general, doesn't endeavor to even determine whether or not the people that it has on, like the doctor who says that polio isn't real, meet these kinds of standards. I'm sure she's an expert. She went to medical school. But what else is going on there that she's saying such ridiculous things? Now, I'll give you just a couple examples with Dave, just in my experience with him, because I think they're very telling. So, for instance, on Ukraine. I want to stick, there's stuff in Israel, too, but I want to stick to Ukraine so they don't call me the Zionist pig.
They'll call you that in any case.
Okay. So, one of the arguments that we hear all the time vis-a-vis Ukraine is that James Baker assured Gorbachev. Well, I'll let Dave say it. This is one of the reasons that Dave says, and one of his go-to reasons, and you hear this repeated. I think even Periel might be familiar with this. One of the go-to reasons that that people say that Putin was provoked and Putin has a legitimate beef behind his invasion of Ukraine. Hit it.
And I mean, you know me, Joe. I'm the most anti-war fucking person there is, and there's no excuse for that. And like tens of thousands of people have died. It's horrible, and a lot of them are soldiers, but a lot of them are civilians. And but to say he was unprovoked is like insane. Is that the promise when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991?
1991,
was, verbally promised and put in writing, was that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east.
Pause.
And NATO at that point, the line then
1991 promised verbally and in writing. Continue.
Germany, right? Like the western half of Germany was in the west, and the eastern half was with the Soviet Union. And they were like, we'll let all of these nations, secede, and the Soviet Union will collapse, and we're giving up on communism.
Pause.
It's one of the greatest things that ever happened.
We'll let the nations secede, and we're giving up on communism. This is in return for the promise of not 1 inch. Go ahead.
And the deal was, okay, you do that, then we won't move NATO. We won't move our military alliance into your area that used to be your realm of influence. And every single president since then has moved NATO east.
Okay, so this is absolutely untrue. So I put it into ChatGPT. This is my prompt. When did Baker make the not 1 inch statement to Gorbachev, and was the end of the Soviet Union contemplated at the time? Answer. James Baker made the not 1 inch eastward statement to Mikhail Gorbachev in 1990, February of 1990, not later, as Smith said, at the very beginning of 1990, during discussions on German reunification, not the end of the Soviet Union. The context was NATO's jurisdiction not expanding eastward into East German territory if the Soviets accepted reunification under NATO. At the time, and this is bold-faced by ChatGPT, the end of the Soviet Union was not being actively contemplated by the U.S. or Western officials. While the USSR was under internal strain, the dominant assumption in early 1990 was that Gorbachev would remain in power and the Soviet Union would persist, possibly in a looser federation. The full collapse came unexpectedly in late 1991. Now, Dave knows this. So, do you have to be an expert? No, this is any high. My daughter could have looked this up and talked about it, but he's being sloppy. I don't know if you want to go worse than that. He's being extremely sloppy. Now show the Emmy Surratt not 1 inch. Now there's a woman, Emmy Surratt. Now she is the real expert. She's a historian who wrote the whole book called Not 1 Inch. So they asked her in an interview, "What explains your book's title?" There are two meanings. First, Jane Baker used it with Gorbachev in early 1990, initially proposing that if the USSR allowed German reunification, NATO would not move 1 inch eastward. But the White House opted instead, in the words of the then Deputy National Security Advisor Bob Gates, for bribing the Soviets out. Gorbachev keeps trying to get back to the initial proposal of NATO non-enlargement, but he's unable to do so after the White House drops the offer. And this is the key point. Now, what kind of honest person will leave this out? What's coming up now? The final settlement on German unification makes clear the opposite, that Article 5 of NATO will move eastward beyond the alliance's Cold War border. Moscow signs and ratifies this agreement. Dave Smith said the other one was in writing. No. The expert, I guess it matters to be an expert, Moscow signs and ratifies this agreement. That's the opposite of what Putin says. He twists and cherry picks historical documents to make contrary claims, but they are inconsistent with later evidence. Okay, so that's one knock on Dave Smith. Now bring up.
I guess we could question the veracity of this particular statement.
Now bring up Smith wrong on Nuland Call.
I assume it's not incorrect, but you're trusting this expert.
Several years
ago. No,
ago,
I'm trusting ChatGPT, who the dates. You think they're both wrong about 1990, February 1990? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying we should. If you're saying you're trusting this expert and not that expert,
we lived through it, Dan. We know that in February 1990, the Soviet Union didn't collapse.
Okay,
the Soviet Union collapsed a year.
Just want clarification why we're trusting this source and not that source. The answer may be obvious, but I just think it's worth addressing.
Now, Smith on Nuland Call. Go ahead. Now, this is another thing. This is this idea that the U.S. or the West, the U.S. orchestrated a coup in Ukraine. Now, there's always elements of truth. We were involved in supporting the protests. We did give money to NGOs. There was there were moderate people who were saying that this is a bad idea, that we're poking the bear, that this could lead to a bad result. It's not like the whole thing is made up, but there's significant other sides to the story. But what is not forgivable is putting spin on facts, on saying things that aren't just simply not true. So here's here's Smith telling Rogan, explaining to Rogan, and he's Rogan's guru, Svengali, whatever, on this issue. Go ahead. This is what he tells. Go ahead.
Several years ago, Victoria Nuland at the State Department, the woman who's driving our war against Russia, was caught on tape admitting that she had engineered a coup in Ukraine.
Unless they believed they could do what they did in Ukraine.
Well, what to overthrow the government and put a government in that's more friendly to them? Yeah, I mean they've tried to do this before.
That was the other thing that you were talking about, that recording, where they were openly discussing the various individuals.
Yeah, the Victoria Nuland phone call, and it's right around. I think it was leaked like. It was right when Yanukovych fled and the new government took over and was immediately recognized by the U.S. It starts with her and Jeffrey Pyatt, who's an ambassador, and they're like, we're in play, okay, like it's happening, and then they're all like, she's talking about who should be in the new government and who should be out of the new government, and then they're talking about how we're going to make this thing stick. Oh, this guy doesn't have the experience. Yats has to be in. Klitschko has to be out. Like going through all the people and all the players who should be in the new government and who shouldn't.
Anybody could have read the New York Times and known what he's saying is not true. This was during the protest. I'm not an expert on this, but during the protests, there was an offer. Yanukovych offered a power sharing agreement in lieu of leaving office. And that's what the Nuland call was about. They were discussing who would be in the power sharing agreement. It was not discussing a coup. It was not discussing who would take over the government. And as I said, anybody can look it up in the New York Times, but I went further. Robert Wright, who is a pretty good expert on foreign policy, interviewed one of Scott Horton's experts. I'm going to play it for you now. And then I confronted Scott Horton with it, who is Dave Smith. And Scott Horton said, yeah, Dave's wrong about that. Play it. You'll see.
And you mentioned Victoria Nuland, and of course, something that has gotten some attention.
Yes, I think it's important. I also researched this issue, and I think it's very likely it was recorded and leaked by Russian intelligence, specifically to kind of implicate the United States, but also it was often misrepresented because according to this phone call, they were discussing not I don't think they were discussing Ukrainian government rupture overthrow of Yanukovych. They were talking about basically proposal by Yanukovych at the time, 2 weeks before the Maidan massacre, to basically offer positions in his government to Maidan opposition leaders.
Pause. And lo and behold, on the Tucker Carlson show, the Russian foreign minister, Lavrov, references the same thing. Go ahead, play it.
And had the deal which was reached the day before between the then president and the opposition implemented, Ukraine would have stayed one piece by now with Crimea in it. It's absolutely clear. They did not deliver on the deal. Instead, they staged the coup. The deal, by the way, provided for creation of a government of national unity in February 2014 and holding early elections, which the then president would have lost.
Now I'm going to talk to Scott Horton about it. Watch. I no longer trust them to not be spinning, and a little spin goes a long way. That's really all.
Dave is my fault because Dave got that from me when I was maybe oversimplifying it earlier. So he gets off the hook there.
Okay, so even Scott Horton, is that a good source for you, Dan? Yeah, even Scott Horton says that Dave was wrong about that. And now, finally, in the most recent interview, this is what he says to Rogan.
In the late 90s, during the first round of NATO expansion, there was a lively debate amongst this. And I don't mean a debate amongst outsiders or experts or whatever. I mean, within the real deal experts, the wisest graybeards in the national security apparatus, there was a real debate with at least 3 secretaries of defense who warned against this. Robert Gates, Robert McNamara, William Perry, the secretary of defense at the time, almost resigned, said his biggest regret in life is that he didn't resign over it.
Okay, so that's William Perry, and I thought to myself, I never heard that Clinton's Secretary of Defense said it was his biggest regret in life to resign over this. So I'll just look it up. So I download the guy's book, and he writes, In the strength of my convictions, I considered resigning, but I concluded that my resignation would be misinterpreted as opposition to NATO membership for Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic membership that I greatly favored, just not right away. In the end, I decided not to resign, hoping that my continued involvement would help to mitigate the growing mistrust. President Clinton had given me just what I had requested, an opportunity to state my case, and unfortunately, I had not been persuasive enough. When I look back on this critical decision, I regret that I didn't fight more effectively. Okay, so point being that the guy didn't say it was his greatest regret in life to not have resigned. As a matter of fact, he even supported Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. He supported the expansion of NATO, only just not in the way that we went about it. He felt that we were too aggressive about it. That actually, if I read his last sentence here, he says, I could have written a paper carefully laying out my case and asked the president to make this paper available to all members before the meeting, or I could have followed up on my consideration to resign. It is possible that a rupture in relations with Russia would have occurred anyway, but I am not willing to concede that. So what he's saying is that, yeah, it might have happened anyway. I think we should have gone slower. I'm not ready to concede that it would have happened anyway. So this is a nuanced position that the guy has. Yes, he's critical of American policy, but do you think that Dave Smith represented this guy accurately? Either of you? You can defend him.
Obviously, he did not.
He didn't. So can you take that down, Tiana? So that's 3 dings in a row, and those are just in my experience with the guy. And there's many other things on Israel that are just as upsetting. I'm just not going to go into them. So
why not?
And then it's going to get boring. So then you have, and he's the most credible of the guys. So Joe leads with Dave Smith as his guy, and my critique is not that he's not an expert. I think he knows about this stuff way better than I do. My critique is that he's not fair-minded, and he's sloppy. I mean, there is a circumstantial case he's being dishonest, right? But he doesn't strike me as dishonest. But maybe if you're only sampling the books and stuff, like for instance, he made another mistake. Well, he kept saying that even Churchill himself said World War II was an unnecessary war. He even says in his book, The Gathering Storm, that it was an unnecessary war. But you only have to read the first page of Churchill's book to understand that Churchill meant it was unnecessary because they should have been stronger against Germany earlier. Bonus clip, here's Dave Smith's take on Churchill's phrase, unnecessary war, followed by the world's leading Churchill historian, Andrew Roberts.
I really highly recommend, if you're interested in this topic, read Pat Buchanan's book on it. It's called Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War. And the unnecessary war is a Winston Churchill quote. It's how he described the war after the war. Like he was looking back at it and going, man, okay, yeah, we really shouldn't have done that. That turned out to be a huge mistake. Because, of course, Britain got totally, destroyed.
What did Churchill mean by the unnecessary war? I've heard 3 times already from 3 different of the revisionist types that this is kind of Churchill's admission that World War II was a mistake.
Oh, the ignorance is just astonishing. I mean, just pick up the book and read the actual context. It's not the most difficult thing in the world. He wrote he wrote his history of the Second World War from 1948 onwards. It sold literally millions of copies. You can get them copies for pennies nowadays. Just please. It's a wonderful book, by the way, also. Pick it up, and he explains precisely it is an unnecessary war because if the West had listened to his warnings and had armed sufficiently and had at the times that Adolf Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland in 1936 and took Austria by Anschluss in 1938, and then the Sudetenland in the October of 1938, and then took the rest of the rump of Czechoslovakia in the March of 1939. If at any stage along that long Via Dolorosa for Europe and the world, Hitler had been stood up to by a strong West, then the war would not have taken place. That is why he calls it the unnecessary war. It's not some kind of an admission that he recognised that Hitler didn't need to be stopped. It's extraordinary that people. It's extraordinary anyone can think this kind of thing. Really.
I have it on reliable sources that Sir Andrew Roberts is ready and available to be a guest on the Joe Rogan show at any time. So what's going on there? To me, it's that Dave is getting this information from secondary sources. He's repeating something he picked up from someone else who said that. And as opposed to something I advise everyone to always do, and I always do it myself, and I'll tell you why I learned this, is that you need to check the original sources. Do not put your reputation behind any fact that someone told you. You have to check it for yourself. And it's funny because this comes back to years ago, if I was even 30 years old, when Pat Buchanan had a book called Republic, Not an Empire or something. I know Dave Smith read that book. And in that book, he said something about Churchill. It's funny, it's such a coincidence, about Churchill thinking that Hitler at one time thought that Hitler was okay. Like even Hitler thought that...
Churchill.
I'm sorry, I do that all the time. Even Churchill thought that Hitler was an okay guy or something like that. And he had a footnote, I'm trying to remember, Winston Churchill, Great Contemporaries, or some book like that. And so I said, this is weird. Churchill said that Hitler was okay. And I went and bought the book. In those days, you couldn't get it on the internet. I found it like at a used bookstore or something. And sure enough, Buchanan took the quote totally out of context. You know, I don't remember all the details of it. I said, I'm never going to make this mistake again. So I always check everything out. This is why Rashid Khalidi infuriates me, because you can't check his footnotes on anything. So I think Dave is doing this. Okay, so that's Dave Smith. We went through Martyr Maid, who's just repeating David Irving stuff. But then he has on Ian Carroll. Now, he claims that Rogan says that he only had on Ian Carroll because he wanted to discuss how people get into conspiracy theories. But that's not the way it seems if you watch the interview. So where's that video? Ian Carroll is a rank conspiracy theorist. And Rogan has him on, and he does not push back on this guy at all. Now remember, they've already agreed that this stuff is dangerous, that marginalized people act on this stuff, that there needs to be kind of a hygiene of ideas.
I've never claimed to be an expert on anything.
This is the problem, Joe. I mean, if somebody
Wait a minute,
says...
you have to claim to be an expert on something to have an opinion on something?
No, you don't have to be. You don't have to be. But
so what's
this is
the
like,
issue?
I'm not a historian, but I'm pumping out history.
But wait a minute, what
I'm not
about
an expert, but I'm talking all the time about this
But you're not
thing.
even talking about specifically on what he just said.
No, I'm saying, this is my point about this. You say, I'm not an expert.
So what's the solution? To not talk about it?
No, it's to have more experts around.
Well, the expert class hasn't done a great job,
I know,
man. This is follow the science.
Absolutely,
Yeah, but you know what?
I agree with that. I just said to you, I agree with that.
Right, I know.
But
So
one
Douglas,
of the problems
during
is,
all of COVID, I will put my track record against any of the expert class on COVID. I'm glad to do that. So should I have just shut up? Should I have shut up by opposing lockdowns and opposing vaccine mandates and talking about the lab leak theory?
At the time. You realize
that's the entire argument that you're making. Let the experts handle this.
No.
You're not an expert. You're right. I was just a comedian.
You're wildly not listening to what I'm saying. I think you have to take... I think we should agree, perhaps, on the following, that one major thing can break down in front of your eyes, or many major things. And it does not mean that every single one of the sewer gates should be lifted. Okay?
What? Yeah, I get that point.
But who's saying it should be?
I'm saying this is the chatter on what is part of our side at the moment, is that a lot of the sewer gates are being lifted, sometimes by people who know that they're doing it, sometimes by people who don't, sometimes by people who say, I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there. But at the very least, there's some damn hygiene that should be required, isn't there?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but sure.
Just that. Let's have a bit of hygiene on our own side, not lift every sewer gate.
And when you say our own side, you mean the right wing, broadly speaking?
Broadly speaking.
You see, they admit that there should be good hygiene, but then to make the case that they've exercised it, they have to then retreat to the notion that Darryl Cooper was just kidding and that Ian Carroll was brought on the show just to talk about how people get into conspiracy theories rather than to present conspiracy theories. Neither of them have pushed back on this at all. So the question is, do they operate the way they agreeing one ought to operate? So play this. Go ahead.
If you're going to interview historians of the conflict or historians in general, why would you get somebody like Ian Carroll or...
Yeah, but Ian Carroll, I didn't bring him on for that purpose. I brought him on because I want to find out, like, how does one get involved in the whole conspiracy theory business? Because his whole thing is just conspiracies. Sure. Welcome.
Dude.
Very nice to meet you.
Yeah, good to be here, man.
So let's take, first of all, why do we love conspiracy so much? Because I fucking love them.
Dude.
I love them. I love finding out the dirty little tactics and secrets and how the government does things and what the fuck's really going on. Why is it so exciting?
It's a knowledge. It's a thirst for knowledge because some of them are total bullshit. But some of them are clearly, there's something there.
Clearly.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that October 7th was a good thing.
Okay,
but
stop there for a second.
The next day.
Now, I have to say, in a certain context, like toying with conspiracy theories can be fun. You know, now Rogan obviously believes in the moon landing, JFK, whatever, did the mafia do it? But what's happening here is that the current crop of conspiracy theories is finding that Israel is responsible for everything and the Jews are responsible for everything. I don't know if it's in this clip I'm going to play or not, but like, for instance, Ian Carroll says that Israel was responsible for 9/11. Now, that's a tall order considering bin Laden took responsibility for 9/11. So presumably bin Laden is a Mossad agent. So now you're going to hear here a whole long thing that he does about Jews and conspiracies, and then you watch Rogan, and he says, right, and he doesn't. And even at some point where Carroll talks about it being a stain on the Jewish people, there's no pushback. Now he doesn't have to push back, but we have a right to. I would push back. You couldn't, I would push back. You've seen me push back, so go ahead.
Entire internet was ablaze about Israel and Palestine, and everyone was talking about it. Wow. And suddenly it was like, oh, all right, let's fucking dig this thing open. Because unfortunately, it is, I think fortunately, I think that the state of the Israeli influence that sustained them for so long, that was essential to them surviving this long, I think that it has grown cancerous to the Jewish faith in general, because Jeffrey Epstein is the perfect example of this. Jeffrey Epstein was the world's most prolific and evil sex trafficker that we know of so far, ever. And he very clearly was a Jewish organization of Jewish people working on behalf of Israel and other groups.
Very clearly.
And so that's a dark stain on Israel and on the Jewish people if you own it. Like, if you try to defend that, that's not good. You don't want to have to defend that.
Right.
You want to be free of that kind of shit, because the Jewish people don't believe in that. That's not what Jews are.
Whoever tried to defend
are regular people. Just
it's the deep state
else.
of the intelligence agencies in Israel.
And the thing about Israel is that Jewish people have every incentive to need to defend Israel, right?
Right.
Because if I'm a Jew, it's like, of course you have to defend Israel. Like, that's very understandable. It's your people, and you don't want another Holocaust. Like, you don't want another. Jews have been in conflict with other people for ages because they are outsiders and because they are so different and because they group up, and lots of reasons. But you don't, like, as a Jewish person, you're now faced with this choice. Do I stand by Israel always, forever, for everything, and defend everything they do? Or do I get labeled as a self-hating Jew like Dave Smith gets labeled, like Glenn Greenwald gets labeled?
Right.
Do I stand against all of my culture? And do I get ostracized by my family and by my community? But the problem is that if you have to defend everything that Israel does, you're forced to defend this fucking deep state that is in bed with these organized crime figures.
Well, the thing is, Israel is connected to one race of people.
Yeah.
It's correct. Whereas the United States, which also is involved in a lot of really fucked up things all over the world, when people think about the United States, they don't think about it as one.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Yep. And so it just puts us all in this impossible situation, and it's an impossible conversation that we all, and I'm glad for it, because it's a maturing process, and I think we need to do it very delicately and very carefully and thoughtfully, because Jewish people are people and they're not evil. But there are evil Jewish people, and there are evil American people, and there are evil Saudi people, and it's just, that's the way it is.
Well said.
All right, this drives me crazy. First of all, get to know how these people operate. And he's a Holocaust doubter as well. They'll always say, yes, something happened. It's terrible what happened to the Jewish people. There's many, many good Jewish people. I'm not talking about all Jewish people. And then they will go on and never change the subject from matters that have to do with Jewish people. This is how they play the game. So here's some recent Ian Carroll. How does one, hygienically, as it were, present a guy like this on their show without so much as a challenge?
And it's like, and that's not the point. The point is not that like all Jewish people are in on this thing. The point is that like, is that Jewish people are susceptible to being approached by this organization, and and we need to support the Jewish people that reject it. Like we need to
encourage them to be on our side. So I think these people that are Jews bad, they're a big problem because we need to bring Jews to our side, not push them away, not be like you're a Jew.
We need to heal. We don't need to like create more divides, because the last thing we need is to create another Holocaust of sorts, whatever that was. Like we don't need to like, and I don't mean that flippantly.
And so like the Holocaust is a good example of one where it's like, I don't think that the Holocaust did not happen. Right. So to be clear, what I'm saying is something happened for sure. Right. But I know that the narratives around the Holocaust that I was taught in school, they were forged in the era of controlled information. But in reality, like Nazi Germany came out of the post-World War I German era, right? And that post-World War I Germany was specifically created by the international banking cartel when they had, after World War I, the Treaty of Versailles, I believe it was called, is when they basically determined what Germany was going to owe, like trillions of marks, and they're going to have to repay all this debt. They basically turned Germany into an economic slave state. And the whole world had business relationships. Everyone else all around the world was funding them. And those death camps, like those camps in Germany, they were slave labor camps. And all of the companies, just like our prison labor system in America right now, where McDonald's and Starbucks and Verizon are using prisoners to do like labor for 7 cents an hour or whatever it is, that's what was happening in Germany in that pre-World War, pre and during World War II, is all of our American and European and British, all these other corporations, these multinational corporations, were building the camps for the work that they were using to produce the products that they were selling. And it was not just a German operation.
There is not evidence that Jeffrey Epstein was working for the Mossad, or if you could listen to the whole podcast, or that the Israeli criminal gangs have been running America since, whatever year. Obviously, if Jeffrey Epstein, if there was such good evidence, Ian Carroll would not be the only one who had that evidence. There would be some intrepid New York Times reporter who is connected, or some Haaretz reporter who's well connected to the Mossad. I mean, they find out everything in Israel about their own government, but somehow they missed this. Also, it's kind of noteworthy that Ghislaine Maxwell is still in prison, that she hasn't been killed, that she hasn't threatened, hasn't released information. Any Hollywood movie about a blackmail scheme, you always see somebody says, listen, I put a folder in a safe deposit box. My daughter has it. If anything should happen to me, she knows where all the information. Jeffrey Epstein was an international mastermind criminal, but he never thought, you know what? I should probably have a plan B of releasing this information in case anybody decides to murder me. Never occurred to him, right? Never mind that there was an autopsy. Never mind that Bill Barr watched the videos himself and said that he's 100% convinced that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. Ian Carroll has got to figure it out. So he tells Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan says, yeah, it's kind of like our deep state in Israel, right? Like just totally credulous. And then he goes on to explain to us why Jewish people we don't want another Holocaust, because, Jewish people, they group up. They're outsiders. What was the other thing? The third thing that he said.
Well, I said they're very different.
They're different. But we group up. Why do we group up? He doesn't mention, they were blamed for killing Christ for a couple thousand years. Like doesn't mention they weren't allowed to do this, weren't allowed to do that. Jewish people are always in peril because, of the things about them that put them in peril. And, we should want what's best for Jews. And this is a stain on the Jewish people. So isn't it good that this is finally coming out? Because after all, if we can just get the Jews to stop defending Jeffrey Epstein, because, if they defend Jeffrey Epstein, they'll be called a self-hating Jew. This is so fucking dark and insidious.
No Jew defended Jeffrey Epstein.
No, of course not. It's all, but you see, I mean, and he's so evil, this dude. But this guy can go on the Joe Rogan show. He doesn't need a minder. He doesn't need somebody there to say, well, you're not sure about this, you're not sure about that. Everything is just taken as fact. And then Joe will say, no, I just had him on there to see how do you get into conspiracy theories. I watched that whole friggin' interview again today to see if I could find the part where they discuss how do you get into conspiracy theories. So this is why I think that...
Like you never see Deborah Lipstadt sitting there, right? When you have these...
All right. I mean, we could go on and on, but this is what bothers me. And now, so then they talk about how this far right stuff is dark, and how they both agree that this new level of anti-Semitism is worrisome. But then, can you play Candace hitting third rails? Then when they discuss Candace Owens, who's actually first let's play Candace Frankists, just to remind everybody the kind of stuff that Candace Owens has been saying.
Many moons ago, before they decided to establish Israel as a country, I know you've read like the short version in the classroom, and it was like, oh, the Holocaust happened, and then we realized that Israel needs a state. No, that's not how it went down. That's not how it went down at the F all, okay? Catholics and Christians were going missing on Passover, and then they would find bodies, okay, across Europe, and they were able to trace them back to Jews. Blood libel. There weren't Jews, okay? These were Frankists. And so just like Leo Frank killed Mary Fagin on Passover back in 1913 or 1914, I can't remember the exact date, he did it during Passover for a reason. This Frankist cult, which is masquerading behind Jews, still participates in this shit to this day, okay?
Now I can play you stuff like this from Alex Jones, who's been on the Rogan show.
The more you attack Israel, the stronger it gets, because the cult that runs it manipulates and controls the white supremacists and all the groups that then come in, not all of them. So there's a bigger dialectic here, and there's good people in Israel too.
So here's another sort of bonus clip. This is Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson discussing, first of all, the arguments that weren't made when Douglas Murray was there, essentially saying why it's okay and good to talk to even the most sketchy people, and discussing Alex Jones, of course, not defending his blatant anti-Semitism, but only obliquely saying that, he's under a lot of mental strain because he's right about so many things. And of course, by the way, he did not predict 9/11. He only referred to the earlier 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. Alex Jones did not predict 9/11.
Well, and he's also channeling some stuff. You can't call 9/11 in detail because you're super informed.
Before the fact.
He called it. How'd that happen?
Right, how did he do that?
No, he's channeling something.
You think
That's
so?
super. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
There's like no other. I mean, tell me how he did it otherwise. I've asked him about it. How did you do that? At length, he had dinner in my barn recently. We were talking about this. How'd you do that? I don't know. It just came to me. And that's real. That is real. The supernatural is real. There are people called prophets. And there are people who were prophets who weren't called prophets, but there are people who have information or parts of information, bits of information, visions of information come to them, and then they relay it. It's not from them. They received it.
This idea of like platforming people is a big one today. Why would you platform that person?
First of all, platform. Oh, you mean letting an adult human being talk?
Right.
I think that's not only allowed, I think that's the law.
Not only that, I think it's important for us. It's even important to talk to people that are completely different than you, that don't agree with you at all.
Well, it's especially important.
Yeah.
And I have to say, your willingness to platform or to have a conversation with Alex Jones, I think was a revolutionary act, actually. Not that everything Alex Jones says is right. It's not. Not everything I say is right.
Alex has gone through some real issues, and one of the reasons why he's gone through some issues is because that guy is uncovering real shit that's terrifying every fucking day.
And then, of course, they all buddy together. So Jake Shields has not been on the Rogan show since he's gone full anti-Semite, but Dave Smith goes on the Jake Shields show, and Dave Smith will big up Candace on Twitter and big up Jake Shields, who will big up Dan Bilzerian.
6 million of them were killed in World War II by a genocidal monster.
Yeah, I mean, that figure's been revised, but
I believe that Jewish supremacy is the greatest threat to America, and I think it's the greatest threat to the world today. I truly believe that.
So, now if you're aware that she's saying something like this, you'd think, maybe it's just me, you would think something would switch inside of you and saying, you know what, this is not fun and games anymore. This woman is really, there is such a thing. I understand we were anti-woke. I understand we got tired of everybody screaming racism and anti-Semitism and everything. But I never meant to say there's no such thing as anti-Semitism. I never meant to say there's no such thing as racism. And this is about as pure, concentrated anti-Semitism as you're ever going to find in the mainstream. I mean, you used to have to go into some like weird Reddit, chat room or something, or that whatever that site, Gab. Was that where the guy who the guy who shot up the Pittsburgh synagogue? Whatever it was that you didn't used to be able to find this stuff, and now it's all over Twitter. So you think, you know what? Let me not have anybody have any false notions about me. Let me keep this woman at an arm's distance. If only, as Daryl Cooper said, Hitler didn't like Kristallnacht because it was bad PR for him, made him look bad. If only because it makes you look bad. Have the sense of Hitler. Okay, play Candace hitting third rails. This is how they discuss Candace Owens.
The Candace Owens show. It's on YouTube.
Yeah, that's right. And it's doing better numbers than any of the shows on cable news.
It's phenomenal. It's like they created a monster with her when they fired her from the Daily Wire. They created a monster.
Yeah, they sure did.
She can't be stopped.
Yeah. Oh no. There's no stopping Candace Owens at
Because
this
she's
point.
hitting all the fucking third rails that no one wants to touch.
All right. Now, and they were referring there to Brigitte Macron being a man, but that's obviously not the third rails that she's touching. And I don't know. It seems to me you just don't yuck it up in such a lighthearted way about a very prominent public figure saying such things about Jewish people or any group. I remember what a villain George Wallace was in the late 60s and early 70s because he was a racist. Or a KKK guy, or anybody who spoke this way about black people was not fit for polite company. They were considered disgusting. Or maybe people were just pretending.
But you would forgive Dave if he kept a warm relationship with Candace as long as he challenged her on some of these outrageous notions, you know.
Well, it's his business if he keeps a warm relationship with her. I would not pry into his private life and say, how dare you have a warm relationship with this woman? Because I don't know their relationship. I mean, if my mother became a vicious racist, I don't know how I'd react to that. I don't. It would put a strain on our relationship, but I don't know if I would necessarily end my relationship with my mother. I don't expect people to cut people off in a one-dimensional way, because relationships are complex. But I don't think I could maintain a warm relationship with a friend who was saying things like that about any group.
And why is it so funny? Like, why are they laughing about it? Like, why is it so jolly?
Because they're happy. It would seem to me about Candace's success. They're laughing that she's one-upped all her, all the more mainstream and the Daily Wire, which
and would they be saying that if she was saying that about anybody other than the Jews?
It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, Dave has been not. He might. When he came on our show, he said he didn't think the Civil Rights Act was necessary. I don't know. I don't want to police anybody, and this is the mistake everybody's making. I'm not in the slightest thinking that Joe Rogan needs to even stop doing this. He can do what he wants, and I don't think he should be taken down, and I don't think Spotify should buckle. I would defend him if they did. What I've been encouraging people to do is to take part in the marketplace of ideas, which means he wants to say this stuff, fine, and we should be shouting out why it's awful and dangerous and ultimately bad for the moral fiber of America. Can you play Rogan Embraces the Marketplace of Ideas? there's just no question that this stuff is being normalized. And again, the reason Murray won the debate is because they never said it's okay to normalize it. They all agree, yeah, this is dangerous. None of them pushed back on Murray about that.
It's certainly never my intention when I talk to someone to try to get more views. It sounds crazy, but I'm only talking to people that I'm interested in talking to. And in Daryl's case, it's because I've been a listener of his podcast for years. That's it. This is like genuinely how I pursue things. Well, that's why you're here. I'm genuinely interested in your views as well, even though you completely disagree with him. This is the marketplace of ideas in real time.
I agree.
That sounds great, right? But then a few days later,
have you been there? Right, that's a good point. You haven't been?
By the way, how is he in all these wars? Can I just go to wars? By the way, how are you allowed to just go to wars? Is that the way
you should at least
can you just
have the
go to
courtesy of going there.
Can I just go to wars?
I don't know. I don't mock people. Even people I had terrible fights with on this show, I don't mock them after they leave. It calls into question whether he really did appreciate the conversation as he claimed. I mean, you could think you didn't like the debate, but I don't know.
That's super shitty. I'm sorry to do that after you've had somebody like Murray on. Like, it really undermines a serious conversation.
I mean, comedians do trash talk each other.
That's
but
fine.
Generally,
but Murray's not a comedian, number one.
No, but I'm saying comedians can't resist that stuff sometimes. That's the only thing that gives me pause.
That's fine. That's fine. You can make jokes all you want. That doesn't read to me like that. That reads to me like you're really undermining a conversation that was meant to be serious.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Is there more to that? Is there more to, or is he just, I mean, I guess you could argue he was just making fun of the guy's accent, or was he making fun of the whole notion that you have to go somewhere? I'm trying to give Joe the benefit of the doubt.
Oh, they're making fun of his argument by mocking his accent. I'm torn on this because...
Although, to be fair, we have done that to Finkelstein.
Well, we have, made fun of his accent.
Yeah, so I don't want to be a total hypocrite.
No, I only did it to Finkelstein. First of all, I don't think I did, but we only did it to Finkelstein.
No, you didn't.
The only reason we did, and I still discouraged it. The only reason that happened is because he attacked us and called us Nazis and sacks of shits and called Coleman a Shabbos Goy.
A black Shabbos Goy.
All without provocation. And then we I allowed.
Well, you had Michael Moynihan, who does a very, very good. Oddly enough, you would think I would do a good Finkelstein, being closer to him, and culturally and genetically. But Moynihan actually did quite a fabulous.
That is true. That is
an impression.
By the way, did you know that? And can you play the Ian? Just put up that image, Ian Carroll, JFK. It's just it's amazing because it's very important to understand how. All these guys, all they talk about is the Jews. Now, we went our whole lives. JFK was killed in 63.
62 or 63? I'm thinking, I think 62 at the end of the year.
We went our whole lives thinking it was either the mafia or the CIA or Lyndon Johnson. Israel was never even on the radar, right? Now, the Jews killed JFK. And here's this tweet from Ian Carroll. This is when Trump finally released all the documents. Now, all the rational people said the documents were a total non-story, just a total fizzle. There was nothing there. Ian Carroll writes, from what I'm seeing at this point, it's way too early to pretend anyone has solved the JFK murder in any concrete way. But we definitely... Can you read it, Dan?
He was killed, by the way, at the end of 63.
Can you read it, Dan?
But we've definitely seen enough in the documents to indicate that Israel was involved in some way and that there were efforts by the CIA over the decades to cover that up.
It's unbelievable.
Keep going.
Very interesting to see which influences, particularly on the right, are completely avoiding this fact or trying to pretend like that it is not what the documents say. Watch closely. You can learn a lot about the information space by watching how people respond to this type of sensitive information. And again, I'm not. Do I get my driver's license, by the way? And again, I'm not of the belief that Israel was the primary player, and I'm not saying we know for sure what happened. I'm just saying that sometimes silence speaks volumes.
Silence. When they're not saying it, that you can read.
Particularly when every American should be entirely dedicated to full disclosure of the facts. All that is not to mention that Israel has resumed bombing innocent civilians in a huge way this week. The modern state of Israel, particularly the deep state of Israel, is the elephant in the room right now, and it's many decades past time we talked about.
Wow, we don't miss a fucking beat, huh?
We're involved in that. So and then finally, let me call final bullshit on this is not to do with the Rogan project, but this is part of the fair. Actually, let me add to the fair-minded argument. One of the things that's bothered me very much about Dave Smith and his school of thought is what appears to me to be an irreconcilable conflict between their position on Israel and their position on Ukraine. So on Ukraine, their position is that Putin was somehow provoked. He was provoked because we promised not 1 inch, because we were constantly talking about NATO expansion, because Ukraine was trying to be sucked into an economic union with the West, whatever is going on in the Donbass. We disrespected Russia, whatever it is. And so provoked was Putin that he should be able to keep 20% of Ukraine. Yes, of course, he wasn't right for doing it. Nobody should say it was okay to invade. But in the end, he should be able to keep 20% of Ukraine. Now, we have a conflict in Israel now, which is based apparently on the 1967 war, right? This is how the territories became occupied. Now, what was the provocation there? Well, Egypt amassed 100,000 troops on the border of Israel. It evicted the UN peacekeepers. It blockaded the Straits of Tiran. It started engaging in genocidal rhetoric. And it entered in, I think in May, it entered into a mutual defense pact with Jordan and Syria, obviously, in what apparent preparation for a military conflict. Now, just 100,000 troops alone, is far more provocation than anything Russia ever suffered, let alone the fact that Israel was a tiny little country and Russia is not exactly threatened existentially by Ukraine. And this, they do not see, that's not a provocation. So not provoked was Israel that they should not be able to keep 1 square inch of the West Bank. Russia should be able to keep 20% of Ukraine because it was provoked and we need peace, but Israel not a square centimeter. Now, they'll make the argument, and by the way, this is always bullshit when you hear this argument. Yes, but our tax dollars, whenever someone says that the reason they care about something is because of American tax dollars, I call bullshit. Nobody really cares about the tax dollars. Those kids protesting in universities, they don't even know whether our tax dollars go to Israel, Hamas, Palestine. They don't even know. They don't care. But think about this irony here. What happens if you believe that argument, what happens, the outcome of that is then our allies get the shit end of the stick. Russia is not our ally. Ukraine is. Therefore, who are we to tell Russia what to do and what not to do? So they can keep 20% of Ukraine. Israel is our ally. So even if they were provoked, our hands must be perfectly clean. So Israel should not be able to keep any little bit of the West Bank, even though they were attacked by Jordan. In the end, they were attacked. The West Bank was not part of Egypt. The West Bank was part of Jordan, and Jordan attacked Israel, even after being warned, don't enter the war. Our beef is not with you. They were warned twice. Jordan attacked Israel and was beaten back, even though Jordan, after the war, refused to negotiate it. Refused to negotiate a settlement, the 3 no's, even though they walked out of Camp David and they walked out with Abbas and they walked out with Obama, they should not be able to keep 1 centimeter because our tax dollars should not be going to a cause like that. Our tax dollars should not be going to defend Israel taking away Palestinian land. And by the way, I do think the Palestinians should have 100% of the West Bank and land swaps. That's almost precisely what they were offered. And this is the ultimate lie. And they know this. They know that the pressure point of the whole argument is that The Palestinians don't want peace. Hamas says they're sworn to the destruction of Israel. So what will they say? Well, no, actually, if you see an interview here or an interview there, and maybe there was some document, Hamas has said they would accept a Palestinian state on the 67 borders. Aha. But what they won't accept, this is what they always leave out, what they won't accept is Israel, meaning they'll accept a Palestinian state on 67 borders, but they will not recognize Israel. They will not say an end to the conflict. It will not be demilitarized. They'll just, if Israel would be so kind as to unilaterally withdraw to the 67 borders, they'll take it. That's all they say. Now, what could be more dishonest than this? Now, Dave knows this. He knows this. I do have some... I know because Perry makes Perry happy. I will play it. It's so fucking dishonest. We know, talking about drawing board plans. Have you seen the drawing board plans? He's worried about Operation Unthinkable. Have you read the drawing board plans that Hamas had for Israel, divvying it up into Bantustans, and these people can stay, these people will be requisitioned as servants of the state, these people will be killed. They had it all planned out of what they were going to do to Israel. They have constant rhetoric. Could you imagine if we had access to Arab archives the way we have access to Western government minutes? Can you imagine the stuff that they're saying?
To say nothing of the fact that they say that at any given opportunity they'll commit another October 7th and another October 7th and another October
7th. They'll withdraw to the 60s. They'll take a state on the 67 borders, and they'll militarize it, and then the rockets will not only be in Gaza, they'll be right over Jerusalem. Can you play Hamas leader on two-state solution?
When will this document be coming out?
Very soon.
And will it blame the Jews for communism, World War I and World War II?
Ask me after this document is declared.
In this interview, Osama Hamdan, you have seemed to be trying to imply that there are shifts going on in Hamas. It seems like you're almost hinting about a two-state solution, about peace process, about changing the Hamas charter. It feels like you want to say more than you can. Let me just finish by trying to get some clarity with you. If I were to say, look, I interviewed Osama Hamdan, looks like Hamas now supports a two-state solution, would I be wrong to say that? Is that inaccurate?
Well, it will be inaccurate, in fact. I want to say clearly, I'm not in charge of saying yes or no for what you are concluding of my words. But I'm clear. Hamas is clear about everything. We have supported the Palestinian state on the lines of 4th of June 67, including the right of return, and Jerusalem is a capital.
But that's
for
a
the
two-state solution.
No, it's not. Well, you can consider it whatever you want, but this is what we have accepted. Nothing more than this, nothing less than this. This is clear. Isn't it clear?
Yes, it's clear that you would support a Palestinian state on 1967 lines that would live side by side with Israel if Israel left you alone.
Well, you have said that. That last point you have added from your side.
No, you said if Israel were to leave us alone, we would accept a truce, negotiations, we would accept a state. You said that at the start of this interview. I'm just trying to clarify before we finish.
Okay. This is the point which I want to say now. That means Hamas is talking politics, while everyone is not trying to listen. They have to listen well. They have to understand well. They have to act according to this, not to act according to some stereotype ideas sent to them every day, every time by the Israelis against the Palestinians, against the resistance, against Hamas.
All right. I mean, isn't that hilarious?
No, it's not fucking hilarious at all. It's enraging.
And it reminds me of, I got to find this for you guys. It reminds me, and I'll play you one other thing too. It reminds me of this, my girlfriend in college sent me this, sent me this Peanuts cartoon with Lucy and Schroeder. Remember Lucy? Schroeder's at the piano. Lucy says, Schroeder, if you were on a concert tour in far-off places, would you call me every day? And Schroeder says, no, I'd never call you. She says, but you'd probably write, though, wouldn't you? He says, he doesn't even look up from the piano. He says, no, I'd never write to you. But you'd probably send me cute little postcards that would show where you were staying and sites you had seen. No, I would never send you a postcard. But if you happen to meet someone in a hotel lobby whom we both knew, you'd probably tell them to say hello to me when we got back home, wouldn't you? And Schroeder says, who knows, I might. And she goes, I knew you'd miss me. It's like he's trying to say, but if Israel were to do this, I knew you'd support a two-state solution, right? It's so pathetic. And then just 2 weeks ago, this guy, Dr. Musa Abu Marzouk, who's a senior Hamas spokesman, there was a trial of some kind in the UK about whether Hamas is a terrorist group. We will never recognize the legitimacy of the Zionist entity or its right to exist. Hamas believes that no part of the land of Palestine shall be compromised or conceded, irrespective of the causes, the circumstances, and the pressure, no matter how long the occupation lasts. Hamas rejects any alternative to the full and complete liberation of Palestine, from the river to the sea. A real state of Palestine is a state that has been liberated. There is no alternative to a fully sovereign Palestinian state on the entire national Palestinian soil. So this is the thing. If you're Dave Smith and you want to make the case that Israel's doing X, Y, and Z wrong or being too brutal or whatever it is, I'm all ears. But if you're going to avoid this issue altogether, or worse, be deceptive about it and point to some obscure admission by some Hamas guy that, yes, we take a 67 state, but play along with the totally false pretense that they're actually admitting to wanting a two-state solution, then you're not a credible person. You're sloppy.
It brings up something in the interview that I think is worth discussing, and it was on Piers Morgan.
Yeah.
Is that Dave Smith admitted Hamas is bad, Hamas should go ideally, and the hostages obviously should be released, but he doesn't feel that the price that it's worth all the civilian casualties, and then him and Murray got into a whole argument about whether Israel is intentionally killing civilians, and having this argument over the meaning of the word intentional, which really to me doesn't seem very fruitful an argument. But
all right. Listen.
I mean, I don't know if you want to address that. I mean, Dave said, yeah, Hamas sucks, but there's so many civilian deaths that it's not worth it.
I'll address it this way. While I think I can be relatively well informed about the historical points, about the political points, and about the current event, progress, I'm not a friggin' expert in war. I don't know if there's a way to achieve security for the Jewish state, which they are certainly entitled to, and kill fewer civilians. If there is, I hope and pray Israel does it that way. I've read certain experts who have either said there is no way or they avoid the question. We had Ken Roth on the show. He refused to answer the questions famously.
I think John Spencer thinks that they're doing as much as they can do.
Yeah, many people think they're doing as much as they can do. But that is a question which Dave Smith is not entitled really to an opinion on. I mean, he can have an opinion on it, but I don't believe he has any expertise he can bring to bear. I think what Dave Smith is really saying is that Israel should just live with this, that Israel should live with the rockets coming in. Israel should just continue to send their children to fight and die. And
he might also say that Israel should just be disbanded. I wouldn't be.
No, I don't think he'd say that, but I don't know. Maybe he would. And I would just answer to him that, as opposed to the American model, the most elite people in Israel, the actual decision makers, they send their children to war. Gadi Eisenkot, who was in the war cabinet, who was involved in this unnecessary action that Dave Smith, his son died. When the decision makers in a Western free country are sending their own children to die, as opposed to the armchair warriors that we criticize in America, it speaks loudly to me. This guy's a military expert. He knows what's at stake. He certainly loves his son, but he thought this is what was necessary, and his son died. So whatever answer Dave Smith wants to give me on that, he has to account for that thought. Is the guy an idiot? He wanted his son to die in the name of sadism? Is he misinformed? Like, what's going on there? And he's not unique. This is the thing. He's not unique. I mean, Netanyahu's brother died. I mean, this is a common story
Well, it's everybody's story.
Well, you would think Americans might suspect that, well, if you become influential, like in America, you get bone spurs, you get this, you get that. That's not the way it is in Israel. They go and they fight and they die.
And they do reserve duty as well.
Yeah. But reserve duty may or may not be dangerous. I'm saying
no, it 100% is dangerous.
Okay, so this speaks loudly, and it demands respect. I'm sorry, but it does. I know Israelis. I know Israelis can be arrogant. I know that anybody in a position of power becomes sadistic. I'm sure there are Israelis who have murdered Palestinians. I'm sure there were decisions I would disagree with. I'm sure there have been war crimes. We know that somebody was just dismissed for lying about the aid worker thing, hospital, the ambulance. I'd also say that friendly fire, not accidental killing of the enemy people who were clearly identified, it is extremely common. I think 10, 20, 30% of deaths are friendly fire in wars. Israel killed its own hostages. These things happen all the time. It's not a policy. There can be sadists, but to think that this is that to imagine that there could be a war with the most moral armor you could imagine, that there wouldn't be tragedies of this nature, is utterly naive. Again, you don't need to be an expert. You need to be fair-minded. You have to have some soul to try to understand the people on both sides of the story. And in this regard, I don't begrudge Darrell Cooper his attempt to try to understand and research World War II from behind the eyes of German people. I would like to understand that myself. The problem is, I fear he does that with an agenda, because he clearly has at least indicated a sympathy for fascism, a sympathy for the Nazis, an antipathy for Zionism. So one wonders if he's doing this in the service of deeper understanding, or if he's doing it in the furtherance of a kind of an agenda. I mean, he's tweeted, that tyranny is the answer. So the jury is out on Darrell Cooper. But to his credit, I should have said this earlier, he wrote a whole long piece saying he's finally going to separate himself from all the vile anti-Semites online.
He did. The way I read it is this is how I read it.
Yeah.
Is that Darrell has sympathy for their views, but doesn't think that being obsessed with Jews is healthy or Christian or productive. Yeah. But he didn't seem to me to be disgusted by them so much as to be like, yeah, I get it. The Jews are difficult, but that's how I interpret it.
All right, we got to wrap.
Well, one more thing, if you whether want to address it or not, at the end of the interview or at the end of the discussion of Israel, Dave Smith mentioned He mentioned that he was talking to Wesley Clark in person, and Wesley Clark mentioned Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl. Is it Richard Pearl?
The Jews, yeah.
Yeah, mentioned those two names as being behind this strategy to take over and I guess take over several countries or to change several governments, and Douglas Murray just kind of laughed at the mere mention of Wolfowitz and Pearl. Was that fair? Dave was simply relating what he had been told by General Clark.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's fair. It could have been fair. It could have been not. If Murray was laughing, it's because he knows that whenever anybody discusses the neocons and their malign influence on the U.S. government, they pick the Jewish names, right? They don't talk about Cheney there's any number of non-Jewish people from the president on down who were very, very pro-war, pro-Afghanistan war and pro-Iraq war. But they always want to pick the
Well,
Jews.
Dave was saying he simply was quoting what Clark had told him.
If he's simply quoting it, then I suppose it's fair. What do you think?
Yeah, I thought that. Yeah, I thought that Dave's, Dave was right that if he's just quoting. Now, of course, there might have been a lot of quotes, and Dave chose that one.
Listen, the Israel stuff is, as far as I said earlier in the show, it's very important. People should not take from this debate that at least reasonable people believe that Rogan should not be able to discuss Israel or be opposed to the war in Israel. Glenn Lowry's opposed to the war in Gaza. This to me is within the realm of what needs to be respected as important and proper debate in this society. So, on the other hand, once Joe Rogan wakes up and finds himself to have the biggest podcast in the world, it would be nice if he would try to present a balanced group of experts on the subject. But he's not. We don't require him to. The New York Times editorial page has often not been balanced at all, and there's nothing more powerful than that. My problem is and has been the stuff that nobody can defend. The stuff that everybody knows is disgusting, vile, dangerous, dark, anti-Semitic, conspiratorial. It hasn't jumped towards anti-black racism, although Tucker Carlson delves in ugly stuff about immigrants, calls them dirty, and compares them to animals or whatever he's done. I'm not 100% sure he compared to animals. He definitely called them dirty, but that's his tone. And that, to me, all decent people should agree on, because we all claim to agree on the basic principles. We all claim to say we despise racism. We all claim to say we despise anti-Semitism. We all claim to believe that people should have facts to back up what they say. As for Darryl, we all claim to believe that historians should show their sources. If you're going to quote from David Irving, you should identify that you're quoting from David Irving. You should leave breadcrumbs. Everybody should be able to trace your research back to a source for anything that you want to claim. There's no disagreement about these things. So your behavior should comport with it. We don't all claim to be pro-Israel, right? Nobody says we all have to be pro-Israel. So sure, have on people who don't support Israel. But why are you having on people who stand against the things that you claim to believe in?
Even there, you say have them on, sure. Just as Donahue used to have on the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah, if you're going to challenge them, absolutely. You can have on Ian Carroll and so when Ian Carroll says Epstein is a deep state of Israel, you'd think somebody say, how do you know that? Where'd you get that from? It's like nothing. Oh, must be. Yeah, Ian Carroll says it. I guess it's true. Candace is awesome. She's touching the third rails. Yes, I agree. It's a dark force, as Dave says, or whatever the words were. But I'll still yuck it up with Candace, and I'll still go on Jake Shields' show, and I'll still tell you, Nick Fuentes, I don't think you're an anti-Semite, and I'll still, there's no limit. There's no fucking limit.
And again, as far as Dave going on Jake Shields' show, you would have been okay with it had he challenged Dave, had he not been so buddy with
Yeah, of course. All right, anything else you want to say? I'm gonna cut this down to
no, I guess that's it.
You think it was boring?
No, I don't think it was boring at all.
I think it was as good an analysis of the debate as I've heard. Yeah.
I think it was excellent.
All right, well, everybody, write your don't press stop yet, Tiana. Write your emails to podcast@comedycellar.com. Good night, everybody. Now, wait, Tiana. Yes. Can you everybody just look at me like I'm talking? Okay, just like Dan, and don't nod, don't be I just need like 10 seconds of Dan and 10 seconds of Periel just looking at me like I'm talking, so that I can edit and have something to pivot off on the editing. Okay. And then when you got 10 seconds of each of them, then you're gonna get 10 seconds of me frowning at Periel.
I'm gonna start with Periel.
Okay. So just keep looking at me, Periel.
Close up, Periel.
Just look like. Figure out how to get videos up that don't come up with the navigation bar, that can be paused with the space bar.
It's a matter of clicking in between programs. That's why there's a...
Whatever it's a matter of, I need you to figure it out, because you should be able to just bring it up and not have the navigation bar there, and you should be able to pause it with the space bar. And I think it does pause with the space bar, doesn't it?
It does, but if you immediately speak, I can't hit pause because I'm waiting to cut back to you. And so I'm in a different program, which means I'm clicking between windows.
Okay, well, you got to. I see other podcasts shot here. They don't have this problem, so you got to figure it out. Ask one of the guys who knows how it can be done.
Maybe ask Mike.
If we need another keyboard, need another. Maybe we need 2 monitors.